Hello everyone. Well, we're getting close to the end of the term, and so what I wanted to do was go over the stuff that's due for the rest of the term and talk to you about how do we get to the finish line. So what's left? We have two more discussions, one for this week and one for next week. We have one more weekly exercise, and then we have the final project. But we got a problem with the schedule, and the problem with the schedule is that the quarter ends on June 2nd, and that's next Friday. So if we were to go with and I also want to give you time to do your final project, but we've been kind of running Tuesday to Tuesday for the weekly exercises and the discussion boards. And if we were to do that again for this week, I would leave you with only 3 days to finish your final project. And I'm not going to do that. So I propose the following. Let's go ahead and complete the discussion questions for this week and next week, keeping in mind that the discussion question for next week is really easy. It's just give me something that you learned. Let's drop the weekly exercise for this week, and I'm just going to give you the 10 free points, because what I want you to do instead is to work on your final project. Now let's talk about your final project. I'm going to give you a data set, and I want you to evaluate that data set. It's 125 records in a file called transactions. I want you to see if you can make meaning out of that data set. So using some of the tools we've used this term, using some of the methods that you already know, find me 5 interesting things that managers would want to know from this data set, and then provide a list of recommended actions that you think should be followed based on what you have learned. So I'm going to give you 2 choices. I'm going to talk more about the actual specifics of the assignment in a minute, but I want to give you 2 choices. So you may either write up your findings or recommendations in a paper of 7 to 10 pages. That's the original assignment. So if you look into the Canvas course, you'll see that the original assignment is to write a paper where you show me your findings and show me your recommendations. The other option I want to give you is I want to allow you to put together a PowerPoint presentation with sufficient notes that fully explains your slides. And the reason why I want to offer you the PowerPoint presentation is that, one, I think it can be more fun than writing a 7 to 10 page paper, I'll be honest with you. But secondly, I think that it's good for you to know how to actually present your findings using PowerPoint. We didn't talk really at all about how to do that. That's actually going to be covered in, I think it's 425. It's course number 425. I think it's IT 425 or something like that. This summer, we're actually going to teach that class. We're going to go through in great detail how to put together a great presentation, tell stories with data, that kind of stuff. But we didn't talk about it this quarter, so I'm going to let you use your imagination, use your creativity. The one thing about it, if you choose to do the PowerPoint, I really want there to be sufficient notes to fully explain your slides. So you're not getting away from writing something. You're going to still have to write sufficient notes to sort of explain what you found it, why you think it's significant, and also every one of your recommendations needs to be explained in enough detail. Here's a little bit more on your options. Okay, if you do a paper, I want you to do an introduction where you include an executive summary. The executive summary should be a highlight of your findings and your recommendations. Then I want you to go through and talk about how did you do your data analysis, your data mining and your data analysis. What did you look at in the file? Then tell me what did you find that would be of interest to managers. And that should be like 3 to 5, probably more like 5 things that you should find that actually would be interesting to managers in that data set. Then go to a section that talks about what are the courses of action that you would recommend based on your findings, and give me a conclusion. The paper is a final project, so it should be beautifully written. It should be in report format, because remember, it's going to managers. It should be error-free and informative. If you choose to do a PowerPoint, I want a clear introductory slide or slides that introduce what you're actually presenting. It should also talk about your methodology and what you did to actually look through the data file. I want you to give me 5 useful data findings. What did you find in this file? Okay. I want you to give me recommendations for actions. There should be 3 to 5 of those. And then there should be a concluding slide. But note here, my note about notes. Notes. I want there to be notes on every slide that impacts what it is you're showing on the slide. Not impacts, explains what you're showing on the slide. And your notes, the quality of your notes, will help determine the grade that you'll receive. The presentation must be presentation quality, meaning that don't have any typos, don't have any errors, don't have anything in there, and make sure that it's something that would impress as if you're presenting to senior leaders. Now let's talk about the data analysis piece. These are just ideas. There are 2 things in here that I have required just because I want to reiterate some of the stuff that we talked about in the class, but really I want you to be creative here, and I want you to act like you are a data scientist or a data analyst, and I want you to look at this data and I want you to find things that you believe are interesting. So some ideas are, What are the total sales? It would be total sales by product, by salesperson, and by customer. All three of those are options for you. What are the average sales? Now, average sales by product isn't going to make any sense because products all have the same sales price, but it does make sense by salesperson and by customer. So you could calculate average sales by salesperson and by customer. You can also determine if there are any outliers that throw those averages off, and should you remove those outliers to come up with a more accurate picture of what those averages are. The other thing you could do to determine whether or not the outliers are really having an impact is compare the average to the medians, the means and the medians. Remember, if the means and the medians are close to each other, you're probably not dealing with a whole lot of outliers, and you're probably dealing with a pretty tight scatter around the mean. So that would be really interesting information to know. You could also do more information about sales. You could say which salesperson sold the most or the least. You could identify which customer bought the most or the least. And then you could also talk about what product was the best or the worst seller. These are trying to identify sort of who are the biggest purchasers, which product are selling the best, so you can actually mount marketing campaigns that are informed by those bits of information. One of the first things that I'm going to ask you to require, or have actually to make sure you include in your presentation, this is a required element, is what would you forecast for sales for the coming 6 months? Okay, based on this data set, remember, we are always basing a forecast off of something in the past. So this is your past. If you look into your past 125 records across the 6 months that I've specified, if you're forecasting for the rest of the year, the next 6 months of the year, what would you forecast your sales to be? That's going to require you to look up what your sales per product were and be able to decide what you think you can best guess your sales to be coming up. The second thing I want to have required in your presentation or your paper is a subtotal of the sales for this period compared to the last period subtotals. You'll see that there are 2 tabs in the Excel spreadsheet that I gave you. On tab 2 are the previous period sales. So you can look at it and sort of compare those two and see kind of how they compare to each other and what interesting information you can find from that. And then, I'm going to give points for creativity. What other useful things can you find in this data set? Once you've shared your findings, either in your presentation or your paper, then based on your data, make recommendations for what you think the company should do. Okay, this class was called Data-Driven Innovation. So we're now looking at data-driven recommendations for innovative approaches to the next 6 months of sales. What should the company do based on what they found, on what you found? Okay, so based on your findings, what directions should the company take in the coming months? What is the reason for your recommendations? Give me 3 to 5 recommendations and make sure the data clearly support those recommendations. Let's talk about your data file. Your data file is called transactions.xlsx. I will upload it to the Canvas course, and it will be sitting there in Module 10 of the course in just well, it should be there by the time I post this presentation. But let's actually take a look at it. It is 125 records. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. Okay, so you have a customer number. I'm sorry, transaction number. You have a month of sale, which is January through June. You have a salesperson, so you have salespeople that are assigned to each of these transactions. You have a product number. What product number did the customer buy? And those change throughout the entire file. You have a sales price. And you have a net price. Now, every time you see product number 1001, the sales price is going to be $54.69 and the net price is going to be $42.21. Okay, sales price is what the customer paid, net price is what it cost you, cost your company. Okay, here's your customer ID. This is the customer who actually purchased this, and you'll see that this customer ID is repeated several times throughout this data set. That's because the customer was a customer of yours multiple times. Okay, and here's the state that the customer lived in. Customer lived in Washington. Okay, every time you see customer number 53690, you'll see the state of Washington, because the state of Washington is where that customer lives. But that customer is going to have purchased probably different product numbers. They'll all have a different sales price. They'll all have a different net price. Okay, so you can see, and then the salesperson for Washington State, Reese is a Washington State salesperson. There they show up again as a Washington State salesperson. And there's Reese again. I promise you it's not the only one, even though so far it is the only one. But there are multiple Washington State salespeople. Here we go. Reese. I guess maybe Reese is the only one. Anyway, I tried to put a couple different salespeople into each state, and I may have missed on Washington. Washington may be, oh, Connors, there we are. Connors is the other person in Washington state. So you have a couple people in each state so that you can get some variety. But it's pretty consistent. You know, you're going to have the same people in every state. They're going to, and then you'll also have the same customer IDs in every state because the customer IDs are associated with a specific location. So that's the primary screen for this, or the primary page for this data set. There's a second data set, and that is sales year, or sales past year. What I did is I went through, and for the customer IDs, and these are all of the customers that show up in the first file, all the way down to the one we were looking at earlier, 53690, you get to see what they spent for the second half of 2015. Okay, second half of 2015 is the 6 months prior to the transaction file that I gave you. This transaction file is actually supposed to be for the first half of 2016. So that's January through June 2016. This is July through December 2016, and you get to see sort of what they spent in the 6 months prior, and you get to see now what have they spent in the most recent 6 months. So this is your data file, and this is what I want you to look through and make some sense out of. You'll analyze the data. You'll use some of the tools we talked about. You'll come up with some conclusions that are data supported and data driven using both this part of the file and this part of the file, and then you'll make recommendations. Remember, the two things I want you to do is I want you to do a forecast of sales. You can use this 6 month period combined with this 6 month period to forecast your sales, or you can just use this file to forecast your sales if you want to forecast by state, or you want to forecast by salesperson, whatever, however you want to do it. Okay. The other thing I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and take a look at this file and compare this file. This is by customer. Take a look at this file and compare this file, which is again the end of 2015, to the beginning of 2016. What useful information can you find when you make that comparison? Okay, back to PowerPoint. All right, your paper or PowerPoint presentation is going to be due on June 2nd, and I cannot be lenient on any late submissions for this assignment. You must turn it in by June 2nd. The reason why is because the course ends and I need to get grades done, and so I just can't deal with late submissions. So please get this in on time. And if you have any questions or you need any assistance, make sure to let me know. I rambled on quite a bit about the file, but hopefully I gave you enough detail and enough information that it's useful and you know exactly what you need to do in order to complete your final assignment.